untouched by affection, until I wrapped my arms around her, igniting our passionate longing. The Fortress of Solitude. Zariah Kendre arrived at the Monastery of Whispered Remedies on a grey morning when mist clung to the mountain peaks like reluctant spirits. She carried only a leather satchel of surgical tools and her reputation, the healer who could cure anything but never smiled, never wept, never allowed a patient's gratitude to linger past the moment of dismissal. The head abbot met her at the iron gates with obvious relief. Master Kendre, thank the ancient powers. Our healing texts are deteriorating rapidly, and you're the only one with knowledge of both medicine and preservation techniques. She nodded once, crisp and professional. Show me the library. The monastery's halls stretched in austere beauty, stone corridors lit by narrow windows that turned sunlight into precise blades of illumination. Everything here spoke of discipline, of devotion channeled into structure rather than emotion, a philosophy Zariah understood intimately. The library occupied the monastery's entire eastern wing, a vaulted chamber where centuries of medical knowledge rested on wooden shelves carved with protective symbols. And there, at a desk surrounded by careful stacks of manuscripts, worked a man who looked up at her approach with startling green eyes. Master Kendre, the abbot said, this is Derian Voss, our chief scribe. He'll assist with identifying which texts require your attention first. Derian stood, and Zariah registered details automatically. Tall but not imposing, hands stained with ink, movements economical and precise. He bowed slightly, respectful but not deferential. An honor, he said simply. She didn't return the pleasantry. I'll need a workspace with northern light, distilled water, and complete silence during preservation procedures. Of course. His voice carried no offense at her brusqueness, only calm acceptance. I've prepared a restoration room according to the specifications in your letter. Over the following days, they established a rhythm as careful as a meditation practice. Zariah would arrive each morning as dawn painted the mountains gold, finding Derian already working, having selected manuscripts for her review. He never spoke unnecessarily, never asked personal questions, never attempted the friendly overtures that made her skin crawl with the obligation to reciprocate. She found herself, not relaxing, exactly, but experiencing something adjacent to it. The monastery's isolation felt less like exile and more like sanctuary. When Derian left tea beside her workspace without comment, she drank it. When he asked purely technical questions about reagent ratios, she answered with more detail than strictly necessary. One evening, as purple twilight filled the library's high windows, Zariah realized she'd spent 6 hours in Derian's presence without once feeling the urge to erect her usual walls of ice. The thought unsettled her enough that she left abruptly, barely acknowledging his quiet good night. But she returned the next morning, and the morning after, drawn by something she couldn't quite name. The peaceful silence, perhaps, or the way shared work could exist without demanding emotional investment. Or so she told herself, not yet recognizing the first hairline cracks forming in the fortress she'd built around her heart, the breaking of barriers. 3 weeks passed in the monastery's timeless rhythm, and Zariah found herself anticipating the library's quiet mornings with something dangerously close to pleasure. She noticed small things now, how Derian's brow furrowed when he encountered damaged text, the way his fingers moved with reverent care across ancient pages, the coffee he somehow always prepared exactly to her preference though she'd never specified. He left wildflowers beside her restoration tools one morning. Purple mountain blooms with healing properties she recognized immediately. For your work, he said when she glanced up questioningly. The pigments might be useful for ink stabilization. Practical. Not romantic. Yet she kept them in water 3 days longer than necessary. They began taking meals together in the refectory, though together meant sitting at the same table while maintaining comfortable silence. Zariah discovered Derian had apprenticed as a healer before an injury to his left hand, an infection that left permanent tremors too severe for surgical work, redirected him to scholarship. You miss it, she observed one evening, watching him unconsciously flex his fingers. Every day. His honesty surprised her. But perhaps we serve medicine differently. Your hands heal bodies. Mine preserve the knowledge for future healers. Something in his acceptance moved her. Most people she'd known carried their disappointments like weapons, cutting at anyone within range. Derian had transmuted his into purpose. The accident happened on a humid afternoon when summer storms gathered around the peaks. Zariah needed a specific manuscript from the library's highest shelf, a treatise on blood poisoning written 3 centuries prior. The rolling ladder looked sturdy enough, its wood dark with age but apparently solid. She'd climbed perhaps 12 feet when she heard the crack. Everything slowed, the splintering wood, her body tilting backward into empty air, the stone floor rushing up with fatal inevitability. Then strong arms caught her waist, yanking her sideways as they both tumbled onto the thick rug beneath the reading tables. They landed in a tangle of limbs, Darian's body cushioning her fall, his arms still wrapped protectively around her middle. For a suspended moment, neither moved. Zariah felt his chest rising and falling against her back, rapid with adrenaline. Felt his warmth seeping through her linen tunic, his heart hammering against her shoulder blade. Felt the careful strength in his arms, holding her secure but not constrained, as if she was something precious that might shatter. No one had held her like this in 15 years. Not since her twin sister died in her arms from a plague Zariah couldn't cure, when she'd sworn never to let anyone close enough to destroy her again. "Are you hurt?" Darian's voice rumbled against her spine, rough with concern. She should pull away. Should rebuild the distance. Should return to the safety of isolation. Instead, for just 3 heartbeats more, Zariah let herself feel it, the foreign comfort of being caught, being cared for, being held as though she mattered beyond her skills. Then she rolled away, standing quickly, smoothing her tunic with shaking hands. "I'm fine. Thank you." Darian rose more slowly, studying her face with those too perceptive eyes. "Zariah. I should check for damage." She turned toward the fallen manuscript, her voice crisp and professional once more, even as her skin still burned where his arms had been. But that night, alone in her sparse quarters, she pressed her hands to her waist where he'd held her and finally allowed herself to acknowledge the terrible truth. Something long frozen inside her had begun, against all her defenses, to thaw. The awakening. The monastery changed after the fall, or perhaps Zariah simply began seeing it differently. She noticed how morning light transformed the library into a cathedral of golden dust motes. How evening brought the scent of jasmine from the garden where Darian cultivated medicinal plants. How silence could feel like companionship rather than isolation when shared with the right person. She caught herself seeking reasons to be near him, asking questions about manuscripts she could easily research herself, lingering over afternoon tea, volunteering to help catalogue the herb garden's inventory. Each excuse felt transparent, yet Darian never commented, simply making space for her presence with his characteristic quiet grace. Their hands began finding reasons to touch. Passing books across the work table, their fingers would brush and neither would immediately withdraw. When she showed him a delicate preservation technique, she stood close enough to feel his warmth, guiding his trembling hand with a steady one, both pretending not to notice how they leaned incrementally closer. The monastery itself seemed to respond to their shifting dynamic. Ancient healing glyphs carved into the library's stone walls, dormant for decades according to the abbot, began emitting faint light when they worked together. Pale green luminescence that pulsed like a gentle heartbeat. The old texts say the monastery was built by healer pairs, Darian mentioned one evening, tracing a glowing symbol with careful fingers. Partnerships that combined different gifts. The stones were supposed to resonate with complementary energies. Zariah studied the symbols, her medical mind seeking rational explanations even as something deeper recognized the truth. Complementary, she repeated softly, like surgical precision and scholarly patience. His voice held no presumption, only observation. Clinical knowledge and intuitive understanding. Distance and warmth, she added before she could stop herself. Their eyes met across the glowing stone, and the air between them thickened with acknowledgement of everything they'd been carefully not saying. That night, Zariah did something she hadn't done in years. She spoke about her sister. About Kendra, her twin, whose death from hemorrhagic fever had come despite every technique Zariah knew, every desperate hour spent trying to achieve the impossible. About the guilt that had calcified into protective numbness. They sat in the herb garden under scattered stars, and Darian listened the way he did everything, with complete, patient attention that demanded nothing in return. "I convinced myself that caring was the problem," Zariah confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "That if I could just remain detached, clinical, untouched by emotion, I'd be a better healer. That attachment was weakness. And now? Darian asked gently. She looked at him, really looked, taking in the compassion in his eyes, the strength in his scarred hands, the way he'd somehow slipped past every defense she'd constructed. Now I think perhaps I was just afraid. The admission cost her, but also freed something. Afraid that if I let myself feel again, the pain would destroy me. Feeling doesn't make you weak, Zariah. He shifted closer, near enough that she could have counted his eyelashes in the moonlight. It makes you human. When his hand covered hers on the garden bench, she didn't pull away. Instead, her fingers curled around his, holding on as though he were an anchor in a storm she'd been weathering alone for far too long. The healing glyphs throughout the monastery blazed suddenly brighter, responding to something neither of them fully understood but both were finally ready to explore. The surrender. The following days passed in exquisite tension, every interaction charged with unspoken longing. Zariah caught herself staring at Darian's hands as he turned manuscript pages, imagining how they might feel against her skin. He watched her work with an intensity that made her breath catch, his gaze lingering on the curve of her neck, the movement of her fingers. They circled each other like planets drawn by inevitable gravity, each revolution bringing them closer to collision. It happened on a night when the full moon painted the herb garden silver. Zariah couldn't sleep, her body restless with unfamiliar hunger, and found Darian already there among the medicinal plants, as though he'd been waiting. "I can't stop thinking about you," she confessed, the words tumbling out before courage failed. "About how you held me. About how safe I felt. About how much I want." He crossed the distance between them in 3 strides, cupping her face with trembling hands. "Tell me you want this. Tell me I'm not imagining what's between us." "You're not imagining it." Her voice shook. "I'm terrified, Darian. I don't know how to do this, how to let someone close, how to." He silenced her with a kiss so gentle it made her eyes sting with tears. His lips moved against hers with patient tenderness, asking rather than taking, giving her space to respond or retreat. Zariah chose to respond. She pressed closer, her hands sliding up his chest to curl around his neck, feeling his sharp intake of breath. The kiss deepened, growing from tentative exploration to desperate need. 15 years of suppressed longing poured through her as she opened her mouth beneath his, tasting mint and promises. Darian's arms encircled her waist, pulling her fully against him, and she gasped at the solid warmth of his body, the way they fit together as though designed for this precise configuration. His hands moved across her back in long, soothing strokes, each touch simultaneously calming and igniting. "Your quarters or mine?" he murmured against her lips. "Closer," she managed. "The preservation room." They stumbled through moonlit corridors, stopping every few steps to kiss again, learning the taste and texture of each other with escalating urgency. Inside the preservation room, surrounded by the scent of herbs and old paper, Zariah felt the last of her carefully constructed walls crumble. Darian's fingers found the laces of her tunic, moving with aching slowness. "Tell me if you want to stop. Tell me if this is too much." "Don't stop," she whispered. "Please, Darian. I need to feel this. Need to feel you." He undressed her with reverent care, his hands mapping the landscape of her body, the curve of her shoulders, the dip of her waist, the softness of her hips. Each touch burned away layers of isolation, replacing numbness with sensation so intense it bordered on painful. When she reached for his clothing, her fingers fumbled with unfamiliarity, and he helped guide her, never rushing, always patient. She traced the scars on his damaged hand, bringing it to her lips, kissing each finger with deliberate tenderness. "You're beautiful," he breathed, and she believed him because his eyes held no deception. They came together on the cushioned bench where she'd spent countless hours working, but now she learned an entirely different kind of precision. His lips traveled across her skin, finding places she'd never known were sensitive, the hollow of her throat, the inside of her wrist, the curve where her neck met her shoulder. She responded with growing confidence, discovering that giving pleasure was its own intoxication. When they finally joined, moving together in the ancient rhythm of intimacy, Zariah understood what she'd been missing. This wasn't weakness, this was connection so profound it made her feel invincible rather than vulnerable. Every touch, every sigh, every whispered endearment rebuilt her from the inside out. "I see you," Darian murmured against her ear as they moved together. Not the untouchable healer. Not the fortress. Just you, Zariah. And you're perfect. She shattered in his arms, crying out his name, feeling him follow moments later. In the aftermath, wrapped in each other with their hearts still racing, the preservation room's healing glyphs blazed with brilliant light, celebrating what had awakened between them. The transformation. Dawn found them still entwined, talking in quiet voices about everything and nothing. Childhood memories, impossible dreams, the future that suddenly seemed full of possibility rather than predetermined isolation. Zariah traced patterns on Darian's chest, marveling at her own capacity for tenderness she'd thought extinct. "I have to return to the capital in 3 days," she said eventually, reality intruding. "My work here is essentially complete." She felt him tense beneath her. "And then?" "That depends." She propped herself up to meet his eyes. "I could return to my practice exactly as before, alone, untouchable, perfectly competent and perfectly empty. Or. Hope colored his voice. Or I could choose differently." The words felt like jumping off a cliff, terrifying and exhilarating. The northern provinces need healers. The monastery could use someone with surgical knowledge to complement its scholarly traditions. And I could use. She paused, gathering courage. I could use someone who sees past my defenses. Someone who taught me that being held doesn't diminish strength, it creates a different kind of resilience. Darian sat up, cradling her face in both hands, tremors and all. "You're certain? I won't be the reason you compromise your calling." "You're not compromising it, you're completing it." The truth of this settled into her bones. "I've been half a healer, Darian. Clinical skill without compassion is just technique. You've reminded me what I forgot when Kendra died, that caring for people, truly caring, doesn't make me weaker. It makes me whole." They spent that day walking the mountain paths, planning a future neither had imagined weeks before. Zariah would maintain a small practice at the monastery, traveling to surrounding villages while contributing to the preservation work. Darian would continue his scholarly pursuits while learning surgical preparation techniques that his trembling hands could manage. That evening, the abbot found them in the library, where every healing glyph now blazed with steady luminescence. "The monastery hasn't glowed like this in 50 years, he said with obvious satisfaction. "Not since the last healer pair worked these halls. The stones recognize what you've become together." "What we've become," Zariah repeated, testing the words. She'd spent 15 years as a solitary island, and now discovered she could be part of an archipelago. Connected, supported, stronger for the connection rather than weakened by it. On their final night before her scheduled departure, now transformed into a brief trip to collect her belongings and close her capital practice, they returned to the herb garden where everything had changed. "I was wrong about so much," Zariah confessed, wrapped in Darian's arms beneath the stars. "I thought isolation was safety. I thought feeling nothing was better than risking pain. I thought being untouchable made me powerful. And now I know that being chosen, being held, being loved, that's the real power." She turned in his embrace, kissing him with all the emotion she denied herself for so long. "You didn't just touch my body, Darian. You touched the parts of me I'd locked away and declared dead. You brought me back to life." "We brought each other back," he corrected gently. "I'd given up on ever having a partner who understood both my limitations and my gifts. You see all of me and don't find me lacking." The monastery's stones sang around them, ancient magic recognizing what humans had known since the beginning. That love doesn't diminish, it multiplies, transforms, elevates everything it touches. Zariah Kendre, who had lived untouched for 15 years, had finally wrapped her arms around life again, discovering that the greatest healing comes not from isolation, but from the courage to be vulnerable, to be seen, to be human. Lessons from the heart. True strength lies not in remaining untouched, but in the courage to open yourself to love's transformative power, for vulnerability is not weakness, it is the gateway to profound connection and authentic living. The walls we build to protect ourselves from pain often become the prison that prevents us from experiencing joy, and sometimes the greatest act of bravery is allowing someone to hold us when we've convinced ourselves we must stand alone. Love born from patient understanding reshapes not just our present but redeems our past, showing us that the losses we've survived need not define us, and that healing comes when we finally allow ourselves to be both seen and cherished.